Today we're looking at Birmingham Pen Company's Allegheny River Twilight. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Birmingham's Allegheny River Twilight is a purple or violet ink. Before we get to the writing samples, let's take a look at some of the sciencey bits. Up first is a chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down, I put it in the water for 10 to 15 seconds, and let it creep up. And we see a nice dark left behind gray line on the bottom, which shows that it will resist some picking up from the page if it gets wet. The one on the right I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into the water for that 10 to 15 seconds. We see that that dark gray line from before is now a much darker purple line. So it's really getting in there, and we see that it can hold onto the page, but it still creeps up quite a bit, which means this is not a permanent ink. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to hold up on the page and how hard it might be to clean this ink out of a pen. I let the smear dry for 3 days before I actually test it. Looking at the highlighter, we see that this ink became reactivated and started to feather out in a lot of directions, becoming kind of blurry. So I wouldn't use this if I need to highlight my notes without knowing what I'm highlighting ahead of time. Water definitely reactivated it. All of these things are only let sit on the page for about 30 seconds. We see that most all of that purple comes off, and the only thing left behind is some of that gray that we saw in the chromatography. Now, Pen Flush did the same thing. Pen Flush picked everything up off the page except some of that gray that can be left behind. So we should be able to see some of the writing, theoretically, if we spilled a bottle of Pen Flush on our paper. Bleach completely lifts it off the page, stain the page yellow, but it's gone. Don't bleach near your notebook. And now this is a bell curve, or a normal distribution of the viscosity of the 365 inks that I've tested. I found an average viscosity of 2.5. Keep in mind that 2.1 to 2.9 is normal for its viscosity or flow. Birmingham's Allegheny River Twilight has a viscosity of 2.17. Looking at it, we see that this is definitely in normal. It's on the wetter side of normal, but it is in normal. That means that this is neither a wet or dry ink. So if you want to be able to test a pen to see if the pen itself is wet or dry, this is a good ink to use. Now this bell curve is for the average dry time. For the 365 inks tested, I found an average dry time of 17 seconds. And here, normal is 13 to 21 seconds. Birmingham's Allegheny River Twilight has an average dry time of 13 seconds. That is right on the edge of normal. It means it's a little faster than most of the normals, but it is normal. Not a fast dry, not something that you have to wait 6 days for it to finally be able to fold that letter, but normal. Still. To find the average dry time, I average the extra fine and the medium nib of my writing samples that I do on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. Now let's look at the writing samples. I got this ink in sample form, and Birmingham Pen Company does these great little samples. They look nice. I would definitely prefer a regular sample. Easier to fill from. Because when we look at this sample size, you see I don't go to it very often. It's just a pain. The nibs barely fit. You can barely get any of the ink out of there. You have to go and decant it to something or fill by eyedropper. It's nice. Give us a regular sample, please. It would be so much nicer, so much easier. Make my life easy, please. To keep consistent writing sample, I use the Jinhao 159. The 159 with a 1.1 Goulet stub to write the company name and the the ink name. I use the X450 with a Goulet medium, and I use a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. So we see different pen sizes. Makes it easy for me to keep track when I'm writing. So let's start out with the Clairefontaine. This ink in the top, look at that. No bleed, no feather, it's expected. Looking at the top 1.5,
No feather, no spread, some shading, which is nice. There's no sheen for this ink, but look at the shading that occurs. We get some really nice moving across on these colors where we get dark to light, back to dark to light, to real dark to light again. That's just on the Birmingham 1.1 stub, which often gives us a very uniform color. Going on to the extra fine. I love it when an ink can give me nice shading in an extra fine, and this does it. This does it. So we get it on the quick, but look at how dark that K becomes. Look at what goes on in the brown. Starts dark, gets a little lighter, works its way down, back to dark with the fox. The's nice, lazy nice. 8 seconds to dry. Medium nib gets a little darker. So not only do we get some of the shading in the writing, we get shading in what pen you are using. Depending on how broad your nib is and how wet that pen is, we get shading in the writing itself and in the nib. Fantastic. The shading shows up in the scrubby, not as well. It shows up much better in the writing than it does the scrubby. And on the smear, both the smears let me see the writing that's underneath. I could recover this. Tomoe River. No bleed. It's Tomoe River. Ghosting. Yes, it's Tomoe River. Looking at the front, 1.1 stub, not so much shading here. I don't want to use this ink on Tomoe River. It's not my favorite paper anyway, but I don't want to use this on Tomoe River. I have zero shading. It doesn't feather. It doesn't spread. It has no sheen, but it doesn't shade. I go to the extra fine. I have moments on the K. My Ks tend to get much more ink. They tend to get more shading. Right on the E of the, but that's about it. And 14 seconds to dry. I'm not willing to wait 14 seconds for the way this is coming out on Tomoe River paper. On the medium nib, a little bit darker, only a hair darker. It spreads out more. You get almost no shading again. Almost no shading, it's Tomoe River, and the reason for that is that ink gets to level out while it dries. 22 seconds to dry. In the scrubby, zero shading whatsoever, and there is no recovering if you smudge what you write on Tomoe River. Looking at Rhodia, no bleed. Minor ghosting. Minor, so minor, I don't even really think it's ghosting. I don't see it unless I'm looking for it. If it really bothers you, if you're that anal retentive, don't go with this ink. It's going to drive you bonkers. But then again, most any ink probably would at that point. The 1.1 stub, we do get some shading. Not as much as we did on the Clairefontaine, but we still get some shading. We get it on the H. We get it up here on the H. We have it on the R. In the Twilight, a little bit. But on the extra fine, we get quite a bit more shading in the writing itself. In the writing itself, look at quick. Look at how it changes on the part of the Q. It changes here on the IC. K is always dark for me. Back part of the F, nice and dark. 9 seconds to dry with the extra fine. I can live with 9 seconds with this ink and an extra fine on this paper. In the medium nib, it gets a bit darker. We lose a little bit of that shading. I just think it's because it's a wetter pen. I don't think it says anything on this ink. It does get a little darker. It does lose some of the shading. It shows that way even in a scrubby. We see less shade in the scrubby, but we're putting more ink down. But look at that extra fine. We still see the shade in that extra fine. I think my beard was rubbing on the microphone, making some noise. We'll see if that's better. I could recover this. If I smeared it, I can see both sets of lines. So not too bad. I like it on Rhodia paper. Moving on to Levenger. Now is this spot? That is a spot that came through. That is too bad, isn't it? So look at that. We have one bleed spot. Now that one bleed spot makes me feel like it could be a user error or it could have just been an aggressive moment. I don't know. But I know that I do have one bleed spot, but there is zero show through. No ghosting whatsoever. So I'm not 100% sure about that bleed spot, but it's there. 1.1 stub at the top. Not a lot of shade. But there's no feather. There's no spread. No sheen. But no shading. On the extra fine, not a lot of shade occurs. We get it in spots. It's like if I was dropping water on it. If I sprayed water, then there would be areas of shade. That's what I get. I get it over here, but nowhere in here. I get it right here. It's on the K. But I get it on the B, but then not the rest. And then I don't see it for a while, and it shows up on the P to the S. So it doesn't occur a lot. But we do get that shading again when we change nibs. We go to the medium, definitely a darker ink. So that's good for me. I want to be able to see an ink perform differently. This same thing occurs where I see no shading in the medium. There's no feather, no spread. That's great. No sheen. None of that. I don't like sheen. That's fine. Just not a fan of it. So, but when we look at the scrubby, we see no shading in the scrubby. So I don't expect to be able to really find it in the writing. We do see it in the extra fine on a scrubby, and in both cases, I would be able to read that if I smudged it when I was writing. So if I closed my book a little too early and it was not dry, although look, 6 and 9 seconds, that's pretty quick. That's not too bad. I can wait 6 seconds. I can wait 9 seconds to close a book before I move on. So that's pretty good. Last paper, black and red paper. No bleed. No ghosting. Black and red has been holding up pretty well. It's a nice thick paper. So it does pretty good with this. When I go to the 1.1 at the top, the Birmingham, although, wow, look at how messy that is. But there's no feather, no spread, no anything, including shade. But when I come to the extra fine, I do get a shade difference. I get a tonal difference in the color of that ink. So that's not so bad for me. I go to the extra fine. Not a lot of shading is occurring in the writing itself. My normal culprits right at the K. I tend to get it right there. A little bit right there on the. Not anywhere else. Only 4 seconds to dry. This black and red paper is like a sponge and yet doesn't come through for bleeding. So amazing. Medium, again darker. Another tone of the same ink. So the shading, greatly controlled by your pen and its flow, but you don't get to get it during the writing. I really just love it in the writing. Looking at the scrubby, I barely get any shade that occurs in the fine or in the extra fine. No shading occurs with the medium. Both cases, I could recover if I smeared it. The extra fine looks like it would be harder to recover, but I could definitely recover that medium if I smeared it while I was writing. Just from the bottle. The bottle. You open it up, you try to fill your pen, splatter. Gets all over your desk, hands, you don't even know where it came from. It's on your paper. Birmingham, please. Regular samples. I love what you're doing, that you're trying to do something different. I love it. Regular sample, please. Make life easier for us.
Instead of finding inks that look like Birmingham's Allegheny River Twilight, I prefer to find an ink that would complement that purple on the page. I have chosen Diamine's Hope Pink because of its being a pink ink, as in its name. Before I give my opinion on this ink, I'm asking, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I'd invite you to subscribe. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do my writing samples. I then put the ink in a different pen and write with it for a day. I then put it into another pen to take my notes for this video. My notes for this video were taken with a Lamy Al-Star with a 1.1 stub. So what do I think about Birmingham's Allegheny River Twilight? I think the shading is fantastic, and you can choose different nib and flow to adjust in how much shading you would like. It is a beautiful purple ink that definitely you can squeeze shading out of. Choose the right nib and paper. So now the big question, would I purchase a bottle of this ink? Yes, because I like dusty purples, and this is definitely a very nice dusty purple ink, and it cleans out nice. But you should make that decision on your own. Get a sample and try it today. Thank you.